Imagine you have $10,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account earning a crisp 4%. You check your app, you see the numbers ticking up every month, and you feel like a financial genius. You are doing everything right. You are avoiding the stock market roller coaster, and you are earning a guaranteed return. But while you are sleeping, two invisible forces are quietly siphoning off almost every penny of that growth. By the time you actually go to spend that money in 10 years, you might find that your $10,000 of purchasing power has only grown by about $100. In some cases, you might actually have less than you started with. We have been told that 4% is a win, but when you look at the cold, hard math of early 2026, it looks a lot more like a trap. Today, I am going to show you the hidden tax that the bank statements never mention. It is not a conspiracy, it is just basic arithmetic that most people ignore until it is too late. If you want to know why your savings never seem to buy as much as they used to, even when rates are high, this is the reason. Before we dive into the spreadsheet of doom, I want to make sure you get the best return on your time today. If you find this breakdown helpful, consider hitting the join button to become one of the optimizers. It is how we keep the lights on here without selling you a sketchy masterclass, and you get priority comment replies and some cool custom badges for your trouble. I promise this next half hour will be the highest ROI move you make this week, because we are going to deconstruct the marketing myths of the banking industry. We are looking at data from Bankrate, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and even some deep dive formulas from the CFA curriculum. Most people stop at the headline rate. We are going deeper. We are going to calculate exactly what stays in your pocket after everyone else takes their cut. I have noticed that the smartest investors are not the ones chasing the highest yield. They are the ones who understand the net yield. So, let's start with the big marketing machine that makes 4% look like a miracle. In the early months of 2026, the financial headlines are buzzing. You see ads everywhere for online banks and fintech firms offering 4%, 4.2%, maybe even a teaser rate of 4.5% on your savings. Compared to the national average, which is still sitting at a measly 0.6%, these accounts look like a godsend. If you have your money in a big national bank earning 0.01%, moving to a 4% high-yield account feels like a massive upgrade. And to be fair, it is. But there is a psychological trick being played here. Banks love to talk about APY, or annual percentage yield, because it is a positive, growing number. It makes you feel like your wealth is expanding. I have run the numbers on dozens of these accounts, and while they are better than nothing, they are often used as a distraction. The bank wants you to focus on that 4% because it sounds substantial. It sounds like a real return. But, as we are about to see, the headline rate is just the starting point of a very long subtraction problem. We are living in a world where a 4% return can actually lead to a 0% gain in your actual quality of life. There is a reason we fall for the nominal interest rate trap. Our brains are hardwired to like seeing numbers get bigger. If your balance goes from 10,000 to 10,400, your brain registers that as a victory. This is what economists call money illusion. We tend to think of currency in nominal terms rather than in terms of its purchasing power. I have noticed that even very smart people forget that a dollar is not a fixed unit of measurement. It is more like a rubber band that is constantly stretching and losing its tension. When the bank tells you that you earned $400 in interest, they are not lying, but they are only giving you one piece of a much larger puzzle. They are showing you the top-line growth without mentioning the structural decay happening underneath. It is like looking at a tree that grew 2 feet taller, but ignored the fact that the ground underneath it sank by 3 feet. On paper, the tree is taller. In reality, it is lower relative to the horizon. To truly understand our money, we have to stop looking at the balance in the app and start looking at what that balance can actually buy at the grocery store. According to the latest data from Bankrate and Business Insider, the competitive landscape for savings in 2026 is a game of inches. The national average is still stuck in the basement at around 0.6%, which is basically a rounding error. If you are in one of those accounts, you are essentially paying the bank to hold your money. However, the top-tier online banks are hovering around that 4% mark. These are the accounts that people move their money into when they want to be responsible. They are marketed as the safe harbor for your cash. But here is the catch. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that inflation has been running between 2.9 and 3% over the last year. So, right out of the gate, before we even talk about taxes, that 4% return is fighting a 3% headwind. If you just do the simple math of 4 minus 3, you are left with a 1% real return. That means your money is only gaining 1% of actual purchasing power per year. That is the best-case scenario before any outside hands reach into your pocket. 1% is not exactly the path to riches, but it is better than losing money, right? Well, that is where the story gets much more complicated, because the government has a very different view of that 4%. Most people walk around thinking they are making 1% in real terms. They think, okay, inflation is 3, my bank pays 4, I'm up by 1. It is a nice, clean, comforting thought. But this is the trap. The 1% real return is a phantom. It does not actually exist for most people, because that 1% is calculated on the pre-tax amount. We often forget that the bank and the IRS do not care about the inflation rate when it comes time to settle the bill. The bank reports your full 4% interest to the government, and the government expects their cut of that full amount. They do not say, oh, inflation was 3%, so we will only tax you on the 1% you actually gained. No, they want their piece of the entire $400 you earned on your $10,000. This is the fundamental disconnect. Inflation eats your purchasing power, but the IRS eats your nominal dollars. When you combine those two, that 1% real return starts to evaporate. I have seen so many people park their house down payment or their emergency fund in these accounts and wonder why, after 5 years, the money still feels like it is not enough. It is because they were aiming for a 1% gain, but were actually hitting a brick wall. If you think a 1% real return is disappointing, wait until you see what happens when we factor in your marginal tax bracket. Most people assume that since it is a savings account, the taxes are negligible. They think it is just a few bucks here and there. But I have run the numbers for various tax brackets, and the results are honestly shocking. Depending on how much you earn at your job, the IRS might be taking nearly a third of your interest before you even see it. We are about to look at how interest is taxed as ordinary income, and why there is no special treatment for your hard-earned savings. If you are in a middle or high tax bracket, that 4% yield is not just shrinking, it is being dismantled. We are going to look at the specific rates for the 12, 22, and 32% brackets. If you have ever wondered why your 1099 INT form at the end of the year feels like a punch in the gut, this next section is for you. Because the government does not treat your savings interest like an investment, they treat it like a paycheck. Let's get into the mechanics of how the IRS looks at your savings account. According to Investopedia and PNC, any interest you earn on a savings account is classified as ordinary income. This is a crucial distinction. It is not a capital gain. When you sell a stock that you have held for over a year, you get a special, lower tax rate on those profits. But with a high-yield savings account, the government treats every dollar of interest exactly like the dollars you earn from your salary or your side hustle. This means it gets stacked right on top of your other earnings and is taxed at your highest marginal rate. Even if you only earn $10 in interest, you are technically required to report it. Now, for most of us, that interest is just added to our total income for the year, and we pay our standard percentage on it. I have noticed that this surprises a lot of people who think that savings should be protected. But in the eyes of the tax code, your bank's interest payments are just another form of a paycheck. There are no deductions for inflation and no special credits for being a good saver. You are being taxed on a gain that hasn't even accounted for the rising cost of eggs or gas. This is the first layer of the hidden tax, and it is the most explicit one. To understand the impact, we have to look at the tax brackets. In the US, we have a progressive tax system, which means the more you earn, the higher the percentage you pay on those last few dollars. If you are a single filer earning between $47,000 and $100,000, or a married couple earning between $94,000 and $200,000, you are likely sitting in the 22% marginal bracket. This means for every extra dollar you earn, including interest from your bank, the federal government takes 22 cents. If you earn more, you might be in the 24 or 32% bracket. I have seen many people ignore this when they calculate their returns. They see that 4% and think it is all theirs. But if you are in that 22% bracket, you are immediately handing over nearly a quarter of your yield to Uncle Sam. This is not even accounting for state taxes, which can take another 5 to 10% depending on where you live. When you start adding these up, your 4% headline rate starts looking more like a 3% rate. And remember, we still haven't even talked about inflation yet. The tax man gets paid first, and he does not care if your money has lost value in the real world. Let's put some concrete numbers to this. Imagine you have $10,000 in that 4% account. Over the course of a year, the bank credits you with $400 in interest. If you are in the 22% tax bracket, the IRS is going to take $88 of that. You are left with $312. So your actual after-tax nominal return is 3.12%. That is the actual amount of extra cash you have in your account. Now, compare that to the headline. You thought you were making 4%, but you are actually making 3.12%. This is a reduction of over 20% of your expected gain. I have noticed that people often overlook this because the bank does not withhold the taxes for you. Unlike your paycheck, where the taxes are taken out before you see the money, the bank gives you the full $400 and then you have to pay the tax bill later. This creates an illusion of wealth. You see the $400 and you think you are ahead, but 88 of those dollars are already spoken for. They are just sitting in your account on temporary loan from the government. When you realize that over 1/5 of your return is gone before inflation even starts, the safety of cash starts to feel a bit more expensive. A common point people bring up is that at least the principal is not taxed. You put $10,000 in and you can take $10,000 out without a tax penalty. While that is true, it is a hollow consolation prize. The principal is the money you already worked for and already paid taxes on. The only thing that matters for growth is the interest, and that interest is being hit hard. I have heard people say, well, at least I'm not losing money like I would in a stock market crash. And that is true in a nominal sense. Your $10,000 will never become $9,000 because of a market dip. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the point of saving? We save so that we can buy things in the future. If the interest you are earning is being eaten by taxes, and the remaining amount is being eaten by inflation, then your principal is actually shrinking in value, even if the number stays the same. The comfort of seeing a stable $10,000 balance is a psychological safety net, but it can also be a trap that keeps you from noticing the slow decay of your wealth. We are looking for real growth, not just a steady number. And to find that real growth, we have to look at the second half of the hidden tax. If you think the IRS taking 22% of your interest is bad, wait until you see what the invisible hand of inflation does to the rest. We have established that after taxes, your 4% yield has dropped to about 3.1%. Now we have to factor in the rising cost of living. In early 2026, the data shows inflation hovering around 3%. This means that just to maintain your current lifestyle, your money has to grow by 3% every year just to stand still. If you are only making 3.1% after taxes, you are essentially treading water in a very large ocean. We are about to look at the specific formula used by financial professionals to calculate your real after-tax return. It is more complex than just simple subtraction, and the results are even more sobering. If you have been feeling like you are working harder but not getting ahead, the math we are about to cover will explain exactly why. Because the combination of taxes and inflation is a 1-2 punch that can leave your savings with a real return of nearly zero. Let's talk about the current inflation environment. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index has been rising by roughly 3% annually as we move through 2026. This is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising. Every time you go to the store, every time you pay for a service, you are feeling that 3%. Now, compare that to your after-tax return of 3.12%. This means that after you pay the government, your money is growing at a rate that is almost exactly equal to the rate at which prices are rising. In economics, we call this the real interest rate. It is the nominal rate minus the inflation rate. But we have to be careful here, because we are using the after-tax nominal rate. I have noticed that people often make the mistake of using the pre-tax rate of 4% and subtracting 3 to get a 1% gain. But you can't spend the government's share of your interest. You can only spend what is left. So the real competition is between your 3.12% after-tax return and the 3% inflation rate. The margin is razor thin. You are effectively earning 0.12% of actual new purchasing power. That is not growth, that is just surviving. The hardest part of this to wrap our heads around is the difference between the balance in our account and what that balance can buy. If you had $10,000 in 2025 and you have $10,312 today, you feel richer. You have more dollars. But if the things you want to buy now cost $10,300 instead of $10,000, you haven't actually gained anything. You have $12 of extra purchasing power. I have run this scenario for people many times, and the reaction is always the same. It feels like a trick. It feels like the goalposts are moving while you are running toward them. And that is exactly what is happening. Inflation is the silent thief that doesn't take your money, it just takes the value out of it. It is much more insidious than a tax because you don't see it on a statement. There is no line item on your bank app that says minus $300 for inflation. It just shows up as higher prices for everything you do. This is why the 4% high yield account is so deceptive. It gives you the illusion of progress while masking the reality of stagnation. We stay in these accounts because they feel safe. The psychological comfort of seeing your balance go up every single month is powerful. It is a shot of dopamine that tells us we are being responsible and building a future. I have seen people hold massive amounts of cash, way beyond what they need for an emergency fund, simply because they love the feeling of safety. But I want to suggest that this safety is an illusion. True financial safety is the ability to maintain your standard of living in the future. If your money is not growing in real terms, you are actually becoming less safe over time. You are losing the ability to cover your future costs. The nominal growth is a distraction that keeps us from taking the risks necessary to achieve real growth. It is easy to look at a 4% yield and feel satisfied, but that satisfaction is based on a misunderstanding of what money is. Money is a tool for exchange, and if the tool is getting weaker every year, you are not actually building anything. You are just holding on to a shrinking asset. We have to break the addiction to nominal numbers and start focusing on real after-tax results. Because, as we are about to see, the actual math is even tighter than a simple subtraction would suggest. When you combine taxes and inflation, you are effectively on a financial treadmill. You are running at a 4% pace, but the belt is moving backward at a combined rate of nearly 4%. You are putting in the effort, you are doing the saving, but your position in the world isn't changing. This is the treadmill effect of low-risk, high-tax assets. I have noticed that this is particularly painful for people in higher tax brackets. If you are in the 32% bracket, your after-tax return on that 4% account is only 2.72%. If inflation is at 3%, you are actually losing 0.0% of your purchasing power every single year. You are running as fast as you can, and you are still slipping backward. This is the hidden tax in its purest form. It is the combination of a literal tax and a monetary tax that results in a negative real return. Most people don't realize they are paying this tax because they only look at the bank's side of the equation. But if you want to be an optimizer, you have to look at the whole board. You have to understand that the treadmill is real, and the only way to get off it is to change your strategy. Most people, when they try to do this math, just take the headline rate and subtract inflation. They say 4 minus 3 equals 1. Then they might subtract their tax. But that is not actually how money works in the real world. To get a precise answer, you have to use a specific ratio. I have pulled this from the CFA curriculum because it is the standard used by professional portfolio managers to determine if an investment is actually viable. You see, inflation and taxes don't just happen one after the other in a straight line. They interact with each other. The correct way to calculate your return is to first find your after-tax nominal rate, and then divide it by the inflation rate. It looks like this: 1 plus the after-tax return divided by 1 plus the inflation rate minus 1. I know, it sounds like high school algebra, but this small difference in how you calculate it reveals a lot about how your wealth is actually moving. When you use the ratio method, you start to see that the real return is often even smaller than the simple subtraction suggests. It is the difference between a rough guess and a precise measurement. And when we are talking about your life savings, precision matters. We are going to plug our 2026 numbers into this formula and see what falls out. Spoiler alert, it is not as much as you hoped. Let's run the formula for someone in the 22% tax bracket with a 4% yield and 3% inflation. Step 1. Your after-tax nominal return is 4% times 0.78, which gives us 3.12%. Step 2. We take 1.0312 and divide it by 1.03. When you do that division, you get 1.0011 licks wive. Subtract 1 and you are left with 0.117%. That is your real after-tax return. 0.117%. Let that sink in for a second. On a $10,000 balance, you are actually gaining about $11.70 in purchasing power over an entire year. That is about $1 a month of actual growth. I have seen people get excited about their 4% yield, not realizing that for every $1,000 they save, they are only gaining $1.17 of real value. This is the math that the banks won't show you. This is the reality of the high-yield savings account in a world with 3% inflation and standard income taxes. It is better than zero, but it is a far cry from the wealth-building engine that the advertisements promise. You are effectively paying a massive hidden tax just for the privilege of safety. Now, let's look at what happens if you are a high earner. If you are in the 32% bracket, your after-tax nominal return is only 2.7%. When we plug that into our ratio formula, the result is actually negative. 1.0 divided by 1.0 sen is 0.juju. Subtract 1 and you get negative 0.2%. This means that even with a 4% interest rate, your money is actually losing value every single day. You are working hard, you are saving your money, and you are being rewarded with a slow-motion loss of wealth. I have noticed that many people in this bracket are completely unaware of this. They think that because they have a high income and a high savings rate, they are winning the game. But they are playing against a stacked deck. The government takes a third of the interest, and inflation takes the rest and then some. For a high earner, a high-yield savings account is not a place to grow money. It is a place to watch it slowly dissolve. This is the hidden tax in its most aggressive form. It is the price you pay for not wanting to deal with volatility. And for many people, that price is way too high. You are paying for the feeling of safety with the reality of certain mathematically guaranteed loss. If we project this out over 10 years, the picture becomes even clearer. Let's go back to our $10,000 example in the 22% bracket. After 10 years of compounded interest, your bank statement will show a balance of $13,605. That sounds great, right? You made $3,600 for doing nothing. But when we adjust that $13,000 for 10 years of 3% inflation, we have to divide it by 1.66 thousand U. The result? $10,126 in today's purchasing power. After an entire decade of dutifully saving, after paying your taxes every year, you have gained exactly $126 of real value. That is less than $13 a year. This is what I call the 10-year flatline. You have spent a decade with your money locked away in a safe account, and your reward is a couple of nice dinners. This is the opportunity cost that most people never calculate. They see the $13,000 and they think they won. But the market has moved on without them. The cost of living has moved on without them. They have stayed in the same place for 10 years while the world got more expensive. This is why we have to talk about strategy. Most people stop here and realize they are losing money, and then they make an even bigger mistake. They decide to either spend the money because saving feels pointless, or they dump it all into the latest speculative bubble. But there is a middle ground. We need to understand that a high-yield savings account has a very specific purpose, and it is not wealth building. If you are using it as your primary engine for the next 20 years, you are walking into a trap that could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential growth. We are about to look at the historical data that shows the massive gap between cash and other assets. If you think the $100 we just found is bad, wait until you see the $50,000 you are giving up by not knowing where to put your long-term wealth. We are going to talk about the protocol for when to use a savings account and when to run the other way. Now, after everything I have just said, you might think I am telling you to close your savings account and never look back. But that is not it at all. Cash is still essential, but you have to use it for the right reasons. A high-yield savings account is a tool for storage and safety, not for growth. It is the perfect place for your emergency fund, that 3 to 12 months of expenses that you need to be able to access at a moment's notice. In an emergency, you don't care about the real after-tax return. You care about the money being there when the car breaks down or the roof leaks. I have seen people try to be too aggressive with their emergency fund, putting it into the market and then having to sell at a loss when they actually need the cash. That is a different kind of trap. So, the first rule of the protocol is use high-yield savings for liquidity, not for your legacy. It is a good rate relative to the national average, as CBS and Bankrate point out, but it is still just a holding tank. It is where your money stays while it is waiting for a job to do. If the money doesn't have a specific job in the next 2 years, it probably shouldn't be in a savings account. The second use for a high-yield account is for short-term goals. If you are saving for a house down payment in 18 months, or a wedding next summer, or a big tax bill that is due in April, the 4% account is exactly where you want to be. You are essentially paying that hidden tax in exchange for a guarantee. You are paying for the certainty that your nominal dollars will be there when you need them. I have run the numbers for people who tried to invest their house down payment in the stock market, only to see it drop 20% right when they found their dream home. That is a much more painful tax than the one we are talking about today. So we accept the near-zero real return as an insurance premium. We know that inflation and the IRS are eating our lunch, but we accept it because we can't afford any volatility in that specific bucket of money. The key is to be very honest about which buckets are short-term and which ones are long-term. Most people treat their entire net worth as one big short-term bucket because they are afraid of the market. And that is how they end up paying the hidden tax on everything they own. There is one more strategic use for cash, and that is what I call dry powder, or a volatility buffer. Having some cash in a 4% account gives you the psychological strength to stay invested in your other, riskier assets. If the market crashes and your stocks are down 30%, knowing you have a pile of cash earning a steady 4% can keep you from panicking. It allows you to stay the course. I have noticed that the most successful investors aren't the ones who are 100% invested all the time. They are the ones who have enough cash to feel secure. In this sense, the hidden tax is the price of emotional stability. You are losing a little bit of purchasing power every year to ensure that you don't make a massive emotional mistake with your long-term portfolio. It is a strategic hedge. But again, this should only be a portion of your wealth. Historically, as a wealth of common sense data shows, cash has delivered about a 0.3% real return since 1928. That is almost nothing. Stocks, on the other hand, have delivered about 6.8% real. That is a massive difference over a lifetime. You use the cash buffer to protect the growth engine, not to be the engine itself. The final step in the protocol is to move your long-term wealth from storage to growth. Once you have your emergency fund and your short-term goals covered, every extra dollar sitting in a savings account is being taxed into oblivion. To beat the hidden tax, you have to look for assets that have the potential for real growth that significantly exceeds inflation even after taxes are paid. This usually means a diversified portfolio of stocks or real estate. These assets are often taxed at the lower capital gains rate, and they have historically outpaced inflation by a wide margin. I have run the numbers for a 20-year horizon, and the difference is staggering. If you leave $50,000 in a savings account for 20 years, you might gain about $500 in real purchasing power. If you put that same $50,000 into a diversified stock portfolio, even after accounting for the higher taxes on gains and the same inflation, you could realistically end up with triple the purchasing power. The hidden tax on cash is the cost of doing nothing. The return on investing is the reward for accepting uncertainty. You have to decide which one you are more willing to pay. My advice? Pay for the uncertainty because the tax on cash is a guaranteed loss, while the risk of the market is a potential for actual freedom. To wrap this up, a 4% high-yield savings account is a great place to park your emergency fund, but it is a terrible place to build wealth. Between the IRS taking their cut of your nominal interest and inflation eroding the value of what is left, your real return is likely hovering around zero. If you are in a high tax bracket, it is probably negative. Don't let the marketing of high yield distract you from the reality of low growth. I want to hear from you in the comments. How are you balancing the need for cash safety with the reality of this hidden tax? Have you run these numbers for your own tax bracket lately? Let's treat the comment section as a peer review of these figures. I will be down there responding to as many as I can, especially our Optimizer members. If you haven't joined yet, click that button to support the channel and get your badge. Remember, the bank is in the business of using your money to make their own real returns. Don't make it too easy for them. Understand the math, protect your purchasing power, and stop paying the hidden tax on your future. I am Tom, and this is Tom Talks Money. I will see you in the next one.